Hi, everyone. We're just going to wait a couple of minutes to see if some more people are joining. We're going to give it just a couple of minutes and then get started with some introductions. But welcome. We're very glad that you all are here.
I want to mention that right now it's 9 degrees in Madison, Wisconsin. So if there's anybody, on the West Coast or in Arizona or something, if you want to send us some warmer temps, we would really appreciate it.
All right. I'm seeing some nice comments popping up on the chat. Yes, thank you. Thank you for your support of us Wisconsinites. Very appreciated. All right. So, I think while we're just waiting for folks, last few folks that might be joining to pop on, Um, let me just kind of go over how we were hoping we can run things tonight. So, first of all, thank you all for being here. We're very excited. We think this is going to be a wonderful presentation, as it always is with Jane. Um, we are going to be, for the sake of just flow, we're going to try to hold questions to the end. We are going to be having plenty of time for a Q&A session. However, if something comes up that you want to kind of comment on or ask about in the moment, we will just ask you if you can just please type it into the chat, and we will be monitoring that as we go along, so we can kind of catch anything that's super duper timely and we need to take a break to turn our attention to immediately. Otherwise, we will have plenty of time during the Q&A session. So, and I think with that, I would like to go ahead and introduce our amazing speaker tonight. So this is welcome, first of all, to the webinar, What to Expect When Your Child is Applying to Medical School. Um, and let me tell you a little bit about my colleague, Jane Shepard. So Jane studied at the University of Wisconsin, Oshkosh, and received her bachelor's degree in journalism. She then attended George Washington University and got a master's degree in education and human development. And I think what you will find is that the experience that Jane brings as former director of MD admissions here at UW School of Medicine and Public Health is going to be particularly useful to hear about. She brings over 30 years of experience in higher education, both in admissions as well as advising. Um, and currently she is, of course, a medical school admissions counselor with Gallon Education. But Jane has, over her career, worked with so many students. She really enjoys, in particular, working with pre-med students. And as former director of MD admissions here, she really has excellent insight into what actually happens, quote unquote, in the room where it happens, knowing exactly how admissions committee members discuss various applications and the type of decisions that are made. So I think we're all going to benefit from her wonderful insight today. So with that, I'm going to mute myself and turn the mic over to Jane.
Thank you, Vishali. And I'm so glad that all of you could join us. And I hope that we're able to answer some of the questions that might come up when you're trying to support your child who's applying to med school. Before I get going, I wanted to mention that sometimes I slip up and I say your student. So you can use the terms your child or your student interchangeably in this talk. I'll try to say child, but it's kind of tough because they're really not children anymore, especially when they're at the point where they're applying to med school. So these are the main things that I thought I would go over this evening. First of all, does your child want to go to medical school? Then I'll go over some preparation from high school through the undergraduate years. I'm going to talk about how med school is not just about science, which a lot of people don't realize. I'm going to drill down into some of the parts of the application to medical school. And I'm going to give some resources that you as parents can use as well as applicants. And then some final points. So those are the main things we're going to go over. So let's start with, does your child want to go to medical school? And before I even go there, I wanted to look at this first bullet point. The goal is becoming a physician, not getting into medical school. Look at the long-term goal, and that is becoming a physician. So motivation for this should not really come from parents' expectations. You really want to know that your child wants to go to medical school. And there are a lot of websites out there that talk about supporting your child going to med school, but I did want to mention, I saw one that was called How to Encourage Your Child to Be a Doctor. And that really kind of rubbed me the wrong way because it sounded like it was the parents wanting the child to be a doctor. You really want it to be them so that their heart is really in it. So when students start undergrad, a lot of them are kind of in a track called pre-med. There isn't really a pre-med major, it's a track. And so many of the undergrads say, yes, I want to be a doctor. I saw a statistic that said almost 70% of the freshmen at Johns Hopkins put themselves in that pre-med track. That's a huge number. But actually what happens is that number shrinks as each year of undergrad goes by. So it ends up with about 16% of that original freshman group that apply to medical school. And as you might guess, there are different reasons why this number shrinks. Many of the students drop out because of the rigor of some of the coursework. I know a lot of people talk about organic chemistry or OChem being the big weed out course. That's a really tough one. And a lot of people say, that's it, I'm done. Other people figure out there is a huge commitment in just preparing to apply to medical school, and it's just too much time and effort. So some people say, you know, I think I'm going to try something else instead. Some people take classes that might be gen ed classes, and it opens their eyes to something else they hadn't thought of, and they think, yep, I really didn't know I would love history this much, so I'm moving into that. They also learn about other career options along the way. So those are some of the reasons that those numbers really drop off. Many professions are out there that students might switch to besides medicine that are in the healthcare field. And it's important to keep that on your radar as they're keeping it on their radar. A lot of times people kind of give the answer of, well, I want to be a doctor because I want to help people, but there are so many ways that you can help people in the healthcare field as well. So it could be physical therapy, it could be dentistry, someone might want to be an audiologist or a music therapist. There's just a variety of ways that people can help others in a healthcare field. So rather than zeroing in too much, especially in the pre-college years, it's good to just keep everyone's eyes open to see what else is out there as well. And then take your cue from them. Ask questions that help them reflect. You know, you might, let's say they're volunteering at a nursing home and they come home, you might want to say, well, what did you think about that? Could you see yourself being a caregiver in a situation like that? So make sure that they're kind of driving the reflection, but you can definitely help by asking them what they think. So preparations can start in high school. For some people, rarely, it starts before then, but oftentimes it starts kind of in high school, not to such a focused degree as it does later, but you can encourage experiences. And as I mentioned before, you know, the person that might have been volunteering at a nursing home, there's lots of ways that high school students can volunteer or get jobs. It's kind of surprising to me how many high school students get their CNA licensure and start working as CNAs while they're still in high school. So these are great experiences that you can encourage and support. It's also helpful to know about the requirements and the timelines. So they're not taking their pre-med requirements in high school, but they might start taking some maybe AP courses in biology or chemistry or physics. Anatomy is another one. There might be pre-med courses that would benefit from foundational courses taken in high school. And then being aware of the timelines is also very important. Things really ramp up in the later years of undergrad. So there's plenty of time for certain things, and then other things can be worked on along the way. So it helps to kind of know what those timelines are. Another thing as a parent that you can do, and this sounds really basic, but it's important, is help them find a balance of sleep, exercise, nutrition, and learning. Education is a big part, but it's those other parts that are also important. And one of the reasons that I brought this up is because med school is really challenging. It's really, really tough. It's like getting information from a fire hose. It's just really intense. So as a med student, it's better if they already kind of know what it's like to have that healthy balance, so that they know how to clear their minds after a whole day of studying, or that they know that they'll do better on an exam if they got enough sleep. Eating well makes a difference. Your parents, you all know this, so I won't go on and on about that. Learning about the sections of AMCAS as a parent will also help you kind of understand what your students are getting ready for. And I'll talk a little bit more about this later. And continuing with the preparation, one of the most common questions that I get and many other pre-health advisors get is, what should my child major in? And I think that it's a myth that every student that applies to med school and gets accepted to med school is a science major. Now, granted, most of the people accepted have taken science courses. Maybe they majored in neuroscience or biochem. But if somebody's passionate about something else, they can major in that. And as long as they take their pre-med courses in addition to getting their major requirements done, they should be fine. Sometimes people want a double major, so they might do science plus another major. But I just wanted to let you know that a lot of students that get accepted into med school have majors in things like philosophy. Spanish is a kind of popular one. Psychology is really quite popular. The fine arts, drama and music. One of the most standout med students that I remember at the University of Wisconsin was a drama student, and he was incredible, and he's doing so well. He's very successful, and I think that his choice of major would probably surprise a lot of people. Business is another one that is really interesting because as a doctor, depending on where you're going to practice, it kind of helps to know about the business side of things. And there isn't a whole lot of time in med school devoted to that. So that's another example where it's kind of an interesting major. And this isn't a sure thing for getting into med school, but it can kind of set some applicants apart from others. When there's an interesting major, committee members usually notice it. So just wanted to let you know that students can major in whatever they're passionate about, and usually they do better if they're passionate about it. Considering a gap year is really important as well. I am a huge advocate of gap years. The average age right now for entering med students is between 24 and 25. So you can tell that they've done some other things before starting med school. And there are a lot of different reasons why people might choose a gap year. Maybe they decide to go into medicine later on and they need to kind of catch up with their preparation. Maybe they're a little bit weak on patient exposure, and so they want to spend extra time working on that so that their application will be stronger. So doing a gap year is not a bad idea at all. And a pretty large percentage of incoming students have done a gap year. Open dialogue is the next item, which is really important. I think rather than kind of assuming you know what your student is going through, or them kind of assuming what kind of support you're giving, it's just better to be open about it. You could ask them where they need help. When do they want to be independent, and when do they want your help? Because you don't want to be stepping in when they don't want your help. And independence is something that they should be getting more and more comfortable with as they move along. Ask them what their hopes are. Ask them who they trust for advice. And there's a lot of advice out there, but it's good for them to tell you who they're going to trust. And you can maybe guide things when you learn that maybe they're saying, I'm getting everything I need from Reddit. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but ask who they're trusting for advice. Ask if they have concerns about any parts of their application, and that is going to help you support them. If you know that they're really worried about a certain thing, you can kind of make sure that you have more support and ideas and encouragement in those areas. Another thing that often gets overlooked is finances. Applying to medical school is very expensive. So talking about that might be a great idea. Taking exams is expensive. And obviously tuition and living expenses for medical school are expensive. So those are all the kinds of things that you should just be upfront with your student with and talk about. So earlier I mentioned that medical school is really not just about science. There is a lot of great info on the AAMC website, and we say AAMC in this field all the time. What it stands for is the Association of American Medical Colleges. And I wanted to just show this link. Let's see if I can do this. Okay, if you go to the AAMC and you look at the pre-med competencies for entering medical students, it's something that I often tell my advisees that they should keep at hand all the while that they're getting ready to apply to medical school, because medical schools are going to be looking for these things. So it was originally created in 2011, as it says down here, and it was created by people who work at the AAMC, but also by faculty members in medical schools across the country, and also medical school student services personnel, pre-health advisors on campuses. A wide variety of people who work with pre-med students help develop these competencies. And they were updated somewhat recently. Oh, it says right there, in 2023. So as long as we're at the bottom of the page, let's just start at the bottom and go up. They come in three general categories. One is thinking and reasoning competencies, and this is pretty self-explanatory. You want them to be critical thinkers. They have to be good at quantitative reasoning, scientific inquiry. You want somebody who really is good at figuring out things that might be hard to figure out, looking into it and using science, and written communication. And then this shouldn't surprise anyone, the science competencies, human behavior and living systems. But now we're going to go to the category that has the most bullet points, and that is professional competencies. This is something that I don't think medical schools were as focused on even, 15, 20 years ago. But now these are the things they're really looking for successful physicians. Commitment to learning, cultural awareness, cultural humility, empathy and compassion, ethical responsibility, interpersonal skills, oral communication, written was down in the other category, reliability and dependability, resilience, which really came out during the pandemic, service orientation, since they'll be serving others for the rest of their lives, and teamwork is huge. I also wanted to just mention that when these came out, there was a nice explanation written by written in a paper sponsored by the WMC that says, health is a product of the interactions among biology, genetics, behavior, relationships, communities, cultures, and environments. Critical roles that behavioral and sociocultural factors play in health and illness. So you can see there's a big shift to the human side of medicine that really wasn't emphasized as much in the past. So these things are huge. And when filling out an application, you want to bring out all of these competencies because that's what the committee members are going to be looking for. So now, another big change based on this push for the more human side of medicine is there were big changes made to the MCAT. It's kind of funny because the new MCAT was rolled out in 2015 and we still call it the new MCAT. But they added a whole new section, and that section is called Psychological, Social, and Biological Foundations of Behavior. So you can really see that they're looking at patients as humans, not just as somebody that they're going to diagnose and treat without looking at maybe their race and ethnicity, their socioeconomic background, their age, if they're disabled. There are all kinds of things that they're going to be looking at, and now they're being tested on it as well. The MCAT also changed a little bit because it's not just asking what prospective med students know, but how to use the information that they know, how to apply it to real life problems and situations. And then another way to look at the human side is think about what you as a patient want when you're seeing a doctor. Okay, so when you go to a doctor, you want somebody who's a really good listener and who's a good communicator, because you might need them to explain something that kind of goes over your head or it's very difficult to understand. You don't want just somebody, spouting off all kinds of scientific words and jargon that you have no idea about. You want someone who's going to be a good collaborator. There's so much emphasis now on doctors being able to work together on healthcare teams. So let's say there's a healthcare team and they're working on the case of a patient. Maybe there's a dietitian or a nutritionist in the room and a pharmacist. The doctor might not be the expert on which medication is best. The doctor might not be the expert on what kind of diet this person is going to be using. So really, they work together as a team to get the best outcomes. And so we're going to really want to see a lot of good collaboration in our future med students. So the AMCAS application. This application is really not something you can just, sit down and fill out a little bit before it's due. I mean, you have to start working on this in advance. And in addition, it's a really long application cycle. Let's see, for example, it's 2024. So in May, applicants are going to start submitting applications to start medical school in August of 2025. So it's a really long application cycle. And it's very complicated, so they have to spend a lot of time preparing for it. So the first thing I have that's part of the application is biographical info. And some of that you can guess what it is: date, place of birth, where the person was born, also what language proficiency they have. But they also are going to be answering questions like, what's the size of the household? What is the parents' educational background? What is their income level? So those are the kinds of things committee members have access to when they're evaluating applications. The next major portion is the education and the courses. And so it will show committee members, what high school did this person go to? What college or colleges, because many students transfer along the way. And then every course for undergrad and grad, if applicable, is listed along with the number of credits and the grades. So we're going to get GPAs from these listings. And then they do break the GPAs into two groups, because one is a more scientific or science GPA. So that's like chemistry, physics, math, and biology. And then the other is what they call all other. So we're going to look at different GPAs. The next is the MCAT, and I'm sure all of you have heard of the MCAT, which is the Medical College Admissions Test. I mentioned it at our last slide, and that, is testing their knowledge and readiness for med school. But there are also SJTs. What does SJT stand for? Those are situational judgment tests. And I think I have some notes here. There are two major situational judgment tests that people have to take when they apply to medical school. And one is called the Casper test. And that comes out of a big company located in Canada. And then the other one is called the Preview. And that was developed by the AAMC. And it really focuses on those competencies. And what happens is it's kind of hard to study for these tests, because they get a situation presented to them and then they have to respond. So the situation might involve conflict management. How would they handle something like that? They might have to solve a problem. They might have to answer a situation that has to do with ethics or cultural awareness. So these situations are shown to them, and then they have to answer how they would handle it. And although you can't really prep, you can kind of practice how you would answer situational questions that are posed. So SJT scores and MCAT scores are part of the application. Work and activities. This is a very important part. And I cannot emphasize enough how important the activities are, especially patient exposure. So just to give you a little scenario, we've had people with the highest MCAT scores and GPAs of a 3.9 at a really competitive school. But if they haven't had patient exposure or enough patient exposure, they might not get in. It depends on the medical school and what their mission is, but that is something that committee members are going to want to see, because we want med school applicants to, first of all, know what they're getting into, learn from those around them, reflect on how it makes them feel, and also to see what it's like interacting with other populations. And it's really quite a privilege, actually, to be able to work with different populations and learn from them, because it's going to make them a better doctor in the long run. Letters of recommendation are another part of the application. And here we really advise students to just get people that know them really well. Each medical school is going to have a different combination requirement. It might be a school might give committee letters. Other schools might say, no, we want you to get 4 individual letters, X number of letters from an academic source and 1 from a non-academic source. So you have to look at every med school to see what they want. But again, the letter writer should really know the student, and there are ways that students can get to know their professors, even if they're at a large university where it's more of a challenge. But it doesn't do any good. I remember getting a letter from somebody, and he was a congressman, and he said, John Smith is a fine, outstanding young man. And that letter told us nothing. It wasn't impressive that it came from a congressman. It was kind of a waste of a letter of recommendation to submit. So that's something else that can be talked about with your child. Personal essays. This is a part of the AMCAS application that is probably the hardest. And usually it goes through many, many, many drafts, but it gives the committee members a window into who the person is. So when they're looking at grades and test scores and activities, they kind of get an idea, but it's sort of a 2-dimensional idea, where the personal essay gives them a more 3D idea. Who is this? Why do they want to go into medicine? That is the biggest question that needs to be answered in the essay. What kind of examples can they give to show how passionate they are about serving others? And people have many different paths, and so the essays are varied, but it's something that they should not wait too long to start. It's really a good idea to even just start thinking about it. And after they do the majority of their AMCAS application, when they submit it, they have also checked off boxes on which med schools they want the AMCAS application to go to. So the average number of med schools that students apply to is about 16. I have worked with some advisees who have wanted to do 35. Just applying to more med schools doesn't necessarily make your chances better. And the more med schools you apply to, the more work you have, because when you submit to, let's just say, Johns Hopkins, they are going to send you their application that's specific to Johns Hopkins. So if you pick Johns Hopkins and you picked the University of Maryland is also going to send their own school-specific secondary applications. So secondary applications are a lot of extra work. And so it's very important to really make sure when you create the med school list that you're choosing schools that that the student can really see themselves going to. Otherwise, it's really a waste of time and money. So just be very careful when selecting where to go, and see what interests match in terms of what the student wants and what the medical school can provide. What kinds of things make that medical school unique? So in addition to those secondary applications, there are also essays, and that's where the extra work comes in. Some med schools maybe have 3 essay questions. There was one in North Carolina, I think, that had 7 or 8 essay questions. So these are also important and need to be personalized, and not just, switching the name of the school out from one essay to another. You need to really look at the mission of the school and what they want, and how those things are really attractive to the applicant as well. And then hopefully there are plenty of interviews after the secondary applications are reviewed. Medical schools will send out invitations to interview. And it's really important to practice for those. And there are many different kinds of interviews. So you need to practice for one-on-one interviews or interviews with students, interviews with faculty members, mini multiple interviews, which are kind of like a situational judgment test, but it's more medically related in most cases. So some of the resources that are out there, I mentioned the AAMC, and they've got just so many wonderful things to learn from. So there's something called Anatomy of an Applicant. So that's something good to look at. There is something just for parents called Parents Guide, Helping Your Student Apply to Med School. They have a great MCAT prep course. They also have something called the MSAR, and that is the Medical School Admissions Requirements website. It's a subscription, so you have to pay, I think it's $28. But once you get access to the MSAR, it's really interesting because it lists all of the medical schools in the US and Canada. So that's, I think, like a little over 150. And you can see so many things about each specific medical school, and you can filter for information. So if your student only wants to go to school on the West Coast, you can just filter it and only look at med schools on the West Coast. If they only want schools that match their average MCAT and GPA, which is a good idea because you don't want to be applying to schools that are out of your league, you can filter for MCAT average and GPA average. You can find out how many of the incoming students were from out of state versus in-state. You can find out how much the tuition costs. You can find out what their curriculum is like, because there are, there's a traditional 2+2 curriculum, which means all of the kind of classroom hard sciences are learned in the first 2 years, and then the last 2 years are spent doing the clinical face-to-face learning, but others have combined it. So the students can start seeing patients much earlier. So those are the kinds of things they can look at. And to be honest, I really geek out when I get into the MSAR website because it's just really fun to see what's out there and to try to choose the best path or to create the best med school list. So I mentioned MCAT prep, but there are other MCAT prep resources out there as well. So those are good to look at. Other resources are the campus health professions advisors. So a lot of, especially larger campuses have a whole office for just pre-health advisors. And I really enjoy working with pre-health advisors, but I have to say they're very overworked, especially when you think about what I said with the incoming freshmen that are identifying as pre-med. They're just, they have so many students that they need to see. So if a student wants to meet with a pre-health advisor, sometimes they might have to wait for a couple weeks for a half-hour appointment. But they're also a good resource because their offices often host med schools that are in the area that want to talk about what they offer. They might have mock interviews. They might have all kinds of other resources that students should take advantage of. Independent pre-med school advisors are another option. And one of the things that I think is really great about independent advisors is students don't have to wait as long to see them. They can spend more time with them. And the one-on-one allows the advisor and the advisee to really get to know one another and make really good connections. And it really helps with the advising through the whole application process. Mentors and supervisors are also good resources. So if somebody is shadowing a doctor, they might be able to ask the doctor questions that they might have. A book that I wanted to mention is called The Family Guide to Medical School Admissions. It's by Janet Snoyer, and it has many of the things that I talked about so far, but in much, much greater depth. The websites, med school websites are awesome. because they're very specific. There are other websites that give advice, but I am going to say be selective. There are some geared just toward pre-med students that are kind of, they give advice, good advice and bad advice. And those are typically studentdoctor.net and Reddit. And is there good advice on those? Yeah, there might be some good advice, but sometimes things kind of spin out of control and a lot of myths are generated. People hear things through the grapevine and then all of a sudden it becomes true for all cases. So yeah, I would just caution people when they're using those kinds of websites. Current med students are a great resource because they're living the life. They can say what it's like. This is how much free time I have. This is how biochem was so challenging for me. These are the kinds of clinical rotations I really enjoyed, and they really surprised me because of this or that. And books, there are tons of books out there that are really great in terms of getting insights. Almost anything by Atul Gawande. The House of God, which is a little bit older, but it's a goodie. The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks is a good book. Mountains Beyond Mountains, which is about Paul Farmer. There are just so many great books to learn about the profession of medicine. Many of these are written by doctors, so something else to think about. And then final points I wanted to mention, independence matters. Sometimes parents really, really want to help their med school applicants, their children, but sometimes if they contact by email, by phone, or even visiting med school offices in person, that can undermine an applicant's chances. It makes med school admissions staff kind of wonder about the applicant's maturity, and it brings up questions about the applicant's motivation. Again, is it the applicant who's motivated, or is it the parent who's motivated, who wants their child to be a doctor? So I can remember one time where I did welcome a call from a parent. Their child was a Peace Corps volunteer in Nepal and had telephone problems, couldn't connect, and so gave permission for their parents to call in their place. That was fine, but as you can see, that's an extreme case. We really want to talk to the applicants themselves. Don't call and say, should my son take Chem 103 or Chem 109? No, your son should be calling to ask that. Preparation takes time. As I mentioned, it's a really long application cycle. Asking for help is okay. And I sometimes find that this is really hard for students. There's so much help out there, but it's not a sign of weakness to ask for help. It's actually a sign of strength. So encourage that. It's important to remember that getting into med school is very competitive. And because that's the case, sometimes students don't get in on their first try, but a large percentage of students that get in are reapplicants. So all is not lost if they don't get in on their first try. If someone has applied and they haven't heard much, I want to also say waiting is not always a bad omen. You don't know what's going on behind the scenes. Maybe some of the key players in the MD admissions office have had an illness or are distracted by other things that are going on. Maybe there are technical problems going on with some of the databases they're using. So please don't jump to conclusions and say that everything can be a bad omen if you haven't heard. As I mentioned before, we want you to support and encourage their good health and well-being. And then overall, just let them know that you're there for them. You don't want to run things for them, but you're there and you're listening. And you might be watching them come to their own solutions or coming to their own ways of solving problems, but just being there and supporting them as they do that is what is going to help them in the long run. So with that said, I'm wondering if there are any questions, and Vishali, I'll ask you to kind of delve through what's come through while I was talking.
Yes. So first of all, um, I think that was a fantastic presentation. Thank you so much, Jane. Um, we did get some questions both in the chat and in the Q&A. I've been trying to uh, type back responses to those as Jane was speaking. Okay, so I'm seeing a new question in the chat. I'll start with a previous one that came in and then we'll go to this one. So Frida had asked about international students applying to US medical schools. How successful are they? What's the likelihood of admission? Is it pretty low? You know, I think in the case that Frida was describing, the parents are quite keen on US med school applications, then the student not it doesn't necessarily feel the same way. So I was wondering if you can comment on that, Jane.
Yeah, of course. So not all med schools will consider international applicants, and there are sources. If you go to the AAMC, I believe that there is a list of med schools that accept international students. And also when I mentioned the MSAR, that's that database that I really geek out about, that also will show. In that resource, you can see the number of international students that applied and how many got in. And I have to say, it's usually a very, very small number. There are many layers or hurdles, if you will, for international students. So not only are they not eligible for financial aid, they often have to show the finances for all 4 years up front in order to get their visa paperwork. English proficiency is something that is also checked. And let's see, they have to show proof of insurance. There are, yeah, a lot of, oh, how could I forget? Their foreign education needs to be evaluated. Some schools do that on their own. Others will require you to go to a foreign evaluation company, which depending can be quite expensive. I actually used to work for a foreign credential evaluation company, and there were a fair number of students that did want reports done for the purpose of applying to med school in the US. Many med schools are going to want to see, in addition, some completion of US coursework so that they can see how that applicant performs in a US educational setting. So chances, I'm sorry to say, chances are very, very small, but you can find which schools will consider international applicants.
Okay, thank you, Jane. That was very helpful. Oh, okay, there's a quick follow-up on that question, which is what if that student who themselves is international is actually coming from a US university? Does that change it? It doesn't change their status as an international student, so I would
So
think not.
if it's an F1 or a J1 student, they still might not be considered
Yeah.
by the med school because they're still considered international
hmm
students.
I know that's true also for graduate programs. I mean, it has to do with the visa status and having sponsors, etc.
Mhm.
So, and also it makes a difference in terms of what sources of funding that the school has available that can be used to offset student costs. There is a rule, any federally based funding, which is a one of the primary sources of funding that medical schools have, and this is true for PhD programs as well as MD programs, are federally based through the National Institutes of Health or National Science Foundation, et cetera. And there are very strict regulations there that they cannot be used to support. They can only be used to support U.S. Um, citizens. Okay, so let me get to a few other questions that have popped up in the Q&A. And I just want to say, I will also be trying to respond to some of these questions on the Q&A. So just, keep monitoring those as Jane is answering some, so we can kind of double team it because we're getting a lot of fantastic questions. So, um, another question that came up is, what should a student do during a gap year?
Okay.
That could be a whole seminar itself, couldn't it, Jane?
I think both of us co-presented on that.
I think we did.
And I
Oh,
was anticipating that. So can you all see this? These are
excellent. So
reasons.
Jane is just sharing her screen. She actually, as always, is very well prepared and has some extra slides. Jane, do you want to put it back into presentation mode? That just might make the slide a little, oh, there we go.
Thank you.
There we go. Awesome. Thank you.
Technology is not my strong suit.
No,
Okay.
no, this is perfect. It was my old eyes were having a hard time with
So,
the font size.
68.1% of the entering class of 2022 took gap years, and this is per the American Medical Association. That's a huge number. And these are some of the reasons that students take a gap year. Maybe they took the MCAT and they didn't like their score, so they want to take it again. So that takes time, and you don't want to take it too soon. You want to make sure you're really ready when you retake it. Sometimes students don't have all their prereqs completed. There are certain prereqs that are pretty general to all med schools: biology, gen chem, OChem, physics, English. Those are the main ones, but other schools sometimes require statistics or calculus or psychology or sociology. So those are the main prereqs that students need to take. Or let's say that their grades are not what they want them to be. There are many ways to increase grades, and that can be done during a gap year or gap years plural. Sometimes they don't have enough patient experience, and this is usually the most common thing that I see. And so they need to get clinical exposure and experience. Some people want to do research. So that's a good reason to do gap year. Some want to show service to others. If somebody is in my office and they say, I want to go to med school, but I always wanted to go into the Peace Corps, or I always wanted to do AmeriCorps or Teach for America, I would say, do it. Because showing service to others through some of those organizations really speaks volumes. We love to see those kinds of applicants. They might need to pay down debt or save money. Some are just burned out and need a break. And when you go to med school, you're not going to have a break again for a long time. So it might be just self-preservation. Or there might be personal reasons. Sometimes this is a family reason, if a family member is sick, or there are many other reasons. So those are reasons to consider a gap year. And these are some benefits. I won't go through every single one of them because of our time constraints, but I think, like I said, I'm just a huge advocate of gap years.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Jane. So we also have a question about what is the typical timeline for medical school applications? Kind of what are the different steps that that entails, and generally when do those happen, and kind of when would folks need to start working on each of those components. So if you're maybe able to kind of walk us through a typical timeline, that would be helpful.
Okay. Well, in the first couple of years of undergrad, students are taking a lot of general ed coursework or some of those foundational pre-med requirements. But in addition to that, they can start getting patient exposure. They can start doing research. They can start gaining leadership, which is another great quality for incoming med students. So those things can kind of start, but things really ramp up. Um, it's the most intense in the junior and senior years if someone is taking a gap year. So that's when students need to, let's say somebody's going to apply right out of undergrad, which again, I still think gap years are great, but if they do, it's good for them to start thinking about who their letter writers are going to be. It's good for them. They should be journaling all along so that they remember what they've done and how it made them feel. Um, they may, they should start studying for the MCAT junior year. They should take the MCAT junior year. Working on those activities, ramp those up if there are certain activities that need more focus. The time to submit an application is available in May, and then they can hit that submit button in June. They have about a month once they can get into the application to work on it, and then they can submit it in June. And then it gets verified by AMCAS before it is sent to the medical school. So I hope that answered the question. And Vishali, you might have something to add.
Yeah, I think, I mean, really, Jane, I think, covered it well. And um, it's there are many different reasons for taking a gap year. But you know, one of the most important ones is if it indeed is difficult to kind of log all the different activities and hours you need to. And this actually dovetails with another question I was just typing the answer to, but we can just address it by talking about it. We had a question about what's the timeline as an undergraduate to fit in research, volunteering, shadowing, et cetera, and to what extent. And, I'll let Jane comment on that. Um, but I'll just say that's a very good use for a gap year as well, because it's hard these days to be able to get all of that in. And as Jane mentioned, actually, the majority of students now um, are not applying and coming to med school straight out of undergrad. So that just makes it a little more manageable to get the volume and diversity of experiences that really are going to be examined very closely by the med school admissions committee.
And
So I will um, now turn it over to Jane so she can kind of add to that.
I agree with everything you said. And the only thing I'm going to add is a lot of times I've been at admissions committee meetings and committee members will say, this is a really great applicant, but they need more life experience under their belt. And when you think of it, a lot of the applicants are, 21, 22, maybe 20. And they probably have the capability to do even more before they even start, which is going to make them a better doctor in the long run.
Yep, that's absolutely true. Um, so I'm looking now, I switched over to the chat. It looks like there are some questions in the chat as well. Uh, One is, how long does it take to get your MCAT score?
About a month.
Yep. Helps that everything is digital now. It's all
Mhm.
online. Um, and I believe they can also, because it's all online, if they go and they take it and they are just things went bananas and it was just horrible, and say that they couldn't finish, you know, even like half the exam, whatever. It was just horrible, horrible, horrible. They even have the option of canceling that test, before they leave, so that it doesn't end up,
Mhm.
getting scored. So I'm not sure if everybody was aware of that, but just
Mhm.
wanted to throw that out there.
Good point.
Okay, so I'm gonna hop back to the Q&A. Um, and okay, all right. So there are some, here's one that's a sort of a broader question. And boy, oh boy, have we been talking about this a lot lately with the Supreme Court decision. Um, can you address how ethnicity, gender, and income play into med school admissions?
That's a great question. And this application cycle is the first application cycle where there was no identifying race and ethnicity for the applicants. It's very, very important to the missions of medical school to educate a physician workforce that looks more like our country, looks more like the population of our country's citizens. And so we are trying to get a more diverse workforce, not just in medicine, but in other healthcare fields as well. We can't always tell what somebody's race and ethnicity is unless there's a certain way that they worded that in their essays. But it can tell us something about maybe some barriers they had to overcome. For socioeconomic background, that is something we can see in the AMCAS, but it also can tell admissions committee members a little bit more. So for instance, maybe an applicant had to work full time during all of the summers and had to work pretty many hours per week while in school. So they might not have the opportunity to do as many extracurriculars. So that's something else that they can see. It just allows the committee members to have a more holistic idea of who the applicants are and what what makes them who they are, um, how that will play into them becoming a certain kind of a doctor. So I hope that kind of explains. And Vishali, you might have something to add to that.
Oh, I think that really captures it well. Jane and I typically think about things, I don't know, are we sharing a brain, or I borrow yours sometimes, or I don't know, it's something like that. Yeah. Um, so there are a number of questions about how much is enough. I just answered a question about clinical hours, that in the Q&A. But there's a similar question about how much shadowing is good and how do you relay it. So I'll maybe hand that over to you, Jane, while I crack take a crack at some of these others
Okay,
in the
and thank
Q&A.
you, Vishali, for doing that.
Oh yeah.
Um, so shadowing is a great experience. When we talk about patient exposure, though, it's important to remember that shadowing is a lot more passive. So you're watching somebody interact with a patient. I'm not saying it's bad, it's good. But if there's a choice, I think someone should try to get more exposure face to face. But shadowing is great because it allows applicants to see what a day in the life is like for, let's say, an OBGYN or a pathologist or a radiologist, whatever it might be. Ideally, they can also talk to the person they're shadowing and learn about things that they might have had questions about. This person often becomes a mentor. Ideally, if somebody can shadow more than one type of specialty, that's really great because it's kind of opens the doors. Like if somebody thinks, oh, I really want to be a pediatrician, but then they shadow somebody who is in the ER, that's something they might not have even considered. So it's great to compare and contrast the different specialties. We usually see about 3 shadowing experiences, sometimes more. Also, sometimes they're able to shadow someone for part of a week. That's great. Sometimes it's not possible to shadow for, an entire week or months on end. So whatever can be arranged is appreciated and really looked on as a valuable activity.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would add to that is I often advise my clients to also make sure when they're shadowing to sample a variety of different specialties and also do at least one primary care type of shadowing. Your first year out from med school, your internship year, I mean, when you're an intern, I mean, that's just everything. That's internal medicine, basically. And I also tell them to look at different types of healthcare settings so that they begin to develop a sense for where they might like to practice medicine because the practice of medicine varies how it functions, what it looks like on a day-to-day basis if you're a hospitalist versus somebody in private practice out in the suburbs or something. So um yeah, so let me there is another question. This is an interesting one. I don't know if I have the answer to this. Jane might though. Um, is there a reliable source for information about med school support or acceptance rates for undergraduate colleges sending to med school without looking at each undergraduate school's site? So, in other words, is there a centralized database that AMCAS maybe has that says, oh, yeah, X percent of applicants from school W are accepted to medical school. Otherwise, people have to just go piece by piece to each school's site.
And even then, they might not know how many people from a certain college was accepted to med school. I don't know, to be honest, of a centralized resource for that. The double AMC might have that information. But again, I also don't know who would have access to it. But it does remind me that I get questions about which school should my child go to so they get a better chance of getting into med school. And there was just a story that I saw that came out that a lot of people that went to Ivies had a fairly high rate, but again, those numbers, it's just so competitive. And that's not always a realistic look. There are people that have gone to small liberal arts schools and they've thrived and done really well. There are
Mm-hmm.
schools that are, large state universities where a
Oh,
student
yeah.
does really well. It all depends on the individual, and that's why campus visits are important. If you end up at a gigantic school and you're not good at advocating for yourself, you're probably not going to do as well. And before I mentioned getting letters of recommendation, it's harder to do that at a big, huge school than it might be at a smaller school where you really get to know your professors better. They might even have you over for dinner. I think it comes down to where a student is going to be most successful and how it matches their personality. I know at the University of Wisconsin, we've had students coming from just a variety of kinds of undergrad schools. And I just don't like it when there's too much emphasis on top tier Ivy League schools as
Yeah.
being the only way,
Mm-mm.
because
Yeah.
the chances are just so small.
I would completely agree. It is all about what has the student done in the environment that they are in, right? So, some of the most successful schools for both medical as well as graduate school admissions are liberal arts colleges that don't have medical schools as part of their own campus, right? So the idea that you have to go to a Harvard or a Yale or whatever to be competitive for medical school is simply not true. And in fact, um, well, I can just say off the books that, a student coming from Harvard or Yale in some ways has, let's just say we look carefully at who this person is. There is no automatic assumption that, oh, because they went to that school, they're going to be all set. You know, Someone with a 3.2 from Harvard is going to lose out, and meh, you know, MCAT scores is going to lose out to a kid with a 4.0 from a really great state school with high MCAT scores. I mean, any day of the week.
And another thing, when I mentioned that they should feel comfortable, I think it's good to get the vibe of whether a college is collaborative or cutthroat, because we all know who's going to do better and enjoy it more. Um, Collaborative environments are just, you feel safer,
Yeah,
starts working on that teamwork characteristic that you're going to need. Um, I think that's important too.
yeah, agreed. So I just want to point out we have also the chat with important information. So one of our colleagues, Meryl Kramer, um, just supplied a good answer, uh, additional resource about the question about, undergrad institutions sending folks to med school. So she said the AAMC does publish a list which includes undergraduate institutions that supply 50 or more applicants. So it looks like when a certain critical mass is reached, there is some tracking of that data. Um,
Meryl?
yeah. See, we learn from each other, which is one of the wonderful things I love about working with all of these incredible counselors.
It's,
Um, okay,
it's
so
now
here's
a good,
one. So there are several questions I'm seeing regarding the MCAT from the chat and the Q&A. So I am going to kind of try to combine them all into one question. We can kind of knock them all out to get one. So, okay, it's about multiple times taking the MCAT. First of all, how many times total can you take the MCAT? Someone, I guess, is alluding to a total of 7 tries at the MCAT. They're saying, does canceling the test still use up one of the 7 MCAT tries? And then, relatedly, if the MCAT is taken multiple times, is there super scoring the way there is for the SAT?
Mhm.
So kind of all three of those are different aspects of this. So I'll kind of throw those out to you, Jane.
I honestly don't know how it works if somebody cancels a test and whether that would count for one of the attempts.
Mhm.
And if anyone else knows, please share. Um, as far as what what is done with multiple tests, the AAMC has kind of put out a policy saying the best
Ah,
way.
Meryl just answered. Sorry, I
Oh,
didn't mean to interrupt you. In the chat, voiding the score does count as one of the 7 tries.
thank you, Meryl. Meryl used to be a director of MD admissions as well.
Hmm.
Is now a good time to talk about her upcoming webinar?
Yeah,
Should I answer the
we
MCAT
do.
question first?
Yeah, because we do have a couple of minutes left. Maybe we can answer the last couple of questions and then we can go to that last slide where it lists everyone. So
Okay,
there is, boy, let's see.
well, I'll answer.
Okay,
Should I,
we had the questions on the MCAT. I got those.
hey,
Okay. Oh,
Vishali, I
sure. Go
didn't
ahead.
talk about super scoring yet.
Oh,
So
sorry.
that's okay. There's a lot going on. Um, so the AAMC put out a policy paper that said that it makes the most sense to average the scores. However, at some med schools, and I'm using Wisconsin as an example, each committee member can do what they want. So some pick the highest scores from each of the sections and comes up with the super score. Others really put more emphasis on the last test that was taken. Um, and then, yeah, other people average it. So there's no consistent standardized way that it's looked at, even from one committee member at a med school to another.
Is that going to be delineated um, in AMSAR? How they treat
No, I
MCAT
don't think,
scores? Is
I
that
don't,
stated?
I don't think they include that much detail.
Okay. All right. Oh, here's one more question. Just last one in the Q&A. What does AMCAS stand for?
Oh, that's an easy one. Okay, it stands for the American Medical College Application Service. And I'm sorry if I was throwing around too many acronyms. I often do that and I forget that not everybody knows what some of those stand for.
Okay. Um, well, wonderful. I think we have gotten to almost all of them. There is one more question about what we can do as med school consultants regarding shadowing opportunities, et cetera. So I think maybe um, a good way to answer that question might be to actually go to the next slide where we have our team listed. And I think we're just going to talk a little bit about the types of services we can provide, um, and then also talk about upcoming events that we have for for additional webinars we'll be presenting. So again, I just want to give Jane a round of applause. This was just an amazing information-packed session and great questions. So I feel that I learned some new stuff too, you know. Um, so our team at Gallon, we have 5 pre-health advisors, and essentially what this would fall under the category of independent pre-med, pre-health, or application advisors that Jane was talking about. So this would be separate from whatever students are getting at their undergraduate institutions. And as Jane said, one of the big advantages of having an independent advisor is we can really customize the advice that we're giving to that specific individual. I'll just kind of go through who all of us are, just a little shout out, and kind of what we can each help with, and talk a little bit about different types of packages and types of advising that we offer. So uh, I'm Vaishali Bakshi, and I'm part of the pre-health advising team, and I'm working with Gallon, but I also have a different day job, which is actually as a tenured faculty member in the medical school at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So I'm a neuroscientist. I have a PhD in neuroscience, and I've been at the med school for over 20 years and have served as a faculty member of the admissions committees of several PhD programs, as well as the MD PhD program as part of the medical school admissions committee. And also, I run a lot of the advising and mentorship programs for our PhD students. I teach med students and grad students. So really I guess sort of one of my areas of specialty is MD, PhD admissions. So there was a question about that in the Q&A about how much research you need for an MD, PhD. And I'll just say it's a lot. It's not going to be just sort of dipping your toes in the pool. It's you're going to need to show, your own significant independent research project that you brought from step A to step Z. It's MD PhD students are the creme de la creme. They're the best of the MD applicants and the best of the best of the PhD applicants. But it's something that is very much in demand. So it's a great thing to consider. Um, so Jen Earls, I believe, is on the call. Jen, do you want to just say a few words about your background?
Absolutely. Vaishali, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to meet you, and I'm really happy to be here this evening. My name is Jen Earls. I hail from the Boston, Massachusetts area, where I spent 5 years as the core pre-health advisor at MIT. So I helped hundreds of applicants apply to MD, MD PhD, and DO programs across the country, all the way from the moment they arrived on campus through graduating and taking gap years. So I can help with every step of the process, from preparing and exploring to really getting ready to apply and going through the full application and admission cycle. So I'm looking forward to hopefully working with some of you and some of your applicants. Thank you, Vaishali and Jane. Oh, and Vaishali, currently you're muted. So if you would unmute, we can hear you again. Thank you so much.
I'm sorry. Yeah, Meryl Kramer is also on the call. So Meryl, do you want to say a few words about yourself? Oh, or maybe, oh shoot, maybe maybe you're not logged in as a panelist. So you can't unmute. Sorry, this is because it's a webinar instead of a meeting. Well, I will, on behalf of Meryl, say she's amazing.
Yeah.
Like Jane, she's a former director of admissions. She was at Rutgers University, an outstanding medical school, and like Jane, has decades of experience with the entire medical school admissions process, and interactions with students, and all different scenarios that have come up. So she also um, works extensively with students who are applying to medical school. So and then Rachel Hall is also a part of our team, and she is kind of a woman of all different possibilities. So she certainly knows quite a bit about med school admissions. But what she does that's unique from the rest of us is she really can advise on applications to other allied health programs like dental school or vet school or PA programs, physician assistant programs, nursing school, et cetera. So she has quite a bit of expertise there. Um, and as I said before, we can work with students who are just at the beginning of their journey, who are just entering college. This is one of the areas I focus in. I work a lot with students that are pre-health. So, even starting freshman year, that want to just kind of get some career and life pathway and which direction should I go in. A lot of students come in thinking they're pre-med, and sometimes they end up deciding, oh, I'd actually like to do research, or I'd like to do this or that. Um, so oh, and yes, there are amazing med school advisors at major universities. Yes and no, we do partner with them. Um, but we certainly are in contact with them, and they provide a lot of programming, and sometimes we actually are speakers at some of their programming. But what we essentially do is kind of supplement what they are able to provide, because as Jane mentioned at the beginning, and I know this for a fact because I actually served on the steering committee of some of the typical pre-med undergraduate majors at UW. Um, we are very short-staffed. The major universities have wonderful, wonderful, incredible advisors, but there are also so many students that it is hard for students to get in frequently and get very individualized, customized advising. They are able to provide wonderful overview and really get everybody on the right path. But where we can kind of help is where students are really wanting to say, okay, hey, here's a copy of my personal statement. What do you think? Can you give me some feedback? Or, boy, I have these three activities and I don't know which one I should highlight the most. That's going to be, the most compelling in my application. Or kids that are starting out and, you know, are thinking, well, gosh, which classes should I take that would set me up for this versus that? Research experience, that's another thing that I can advise students on quite a bit. I am a researcher. I have an active lab for the last 20 years. So I think that the way I think of private advisors like us is that we provide a good complement to what the advisors at the universities are able to provide. Excellent. And along those lines, we have another wonderful webinar coming up in the next month, about a month from now, where Meryl will be talking about essays for applying to medical school. So, you know, I think other than, of course, grades and MCATs, I would say probably one of the next biggest, most important factors in a medical school application is the essays. This is how students communicate who they are as individuals and who they are beyond the numbers. And boy, oh boy, I can tell you for a fact, having served on admissions committees for a long time, we put a lot of stock in those essays. So I would highly recommend coming to Meryl's chat because she is very knowledgeable about these things. So um, so I'm gonna kind of stop there, and we do have our contact information. And if anybody's interested, please do get in touch. There's a phone number, as well as you can just go to our website. And we offer comprehensive packages, as well as just, hourly advising options. So it's really for anybody, whether it's somebody that wants just a few sessions, a little bit of help here and there, or whether it's somebody that wants us to kind of walk through from A to Z with them, all the steps from beginning to end. Okay.
All right. Thanks for coming, everybody.
Thank you all for being here.